I'm Isabella and you're listening to Zeno. Each month I have conversations with people from all walks of life about their personal stories of home, identity and the search for belonging. Alix Julian Edwards, welcome to the show. When people ask you the question, where are you from? What answer do you give and what truths are missing from the answer?
Coming back to Berlin, I think I would describe it as home is an expansion of myself, because even coming back to Jamaica from time to time, I felt as a kid I didn't really connect with it so much because I didn't have a chance to really represent myself so much. And that's where I was born. But it took most of my adolescence to really feel out my own culture and really understand where I came from. And going back to it is something that I felt like really helped me define what home was or how it could be. And I've lived in a few different places, but I think specifically here, it gives me the example of how I would describe home. I can expand like myself and I can come back into myself and really reflect and project a bit more into the future, my intentions and who I am or what I want to become. So any place.
It's the sense of becoming.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly this. Yeah. In these recent years, especially as I've done my loop, it feels that way. I go back to places where I've seen, of course, bits of myself, and if I have the opportunity to expand in some place, it certainly can be a home. So I feel like I have the opportunity to create a home in many places.
Because you've just been on a journey. You were in Jamaica for a long time, where you were born, and then you've been in the States for a while, and now you're back in Berlin, where you've been living, and you're soon to be living in Taiwan as well. We'll talk about that later. I like that idea that you've just said about charting the places in which you have spent time and you've been at home in, but seeing it as a new opportunity to potentially expand yourself, because so often the places that perhaps we were born into or raised as children feel very entrapping, claustrophobic and limiting your sense of self. But for you, you're saying that you're going back to these places and you can actually see a potential for expansion of the self.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned this entrapment, because I think for me, America felt like this. And I think a lot of people feel that way there. But being ostracized from certain social contexts, from not being in the development stages of most of the kids in my age group coming into middle school, and you see everyone's trying to find their identity, where I'm looking at my identity as something that might or might not exist, even if I was looking for it, because you need foundations that can help you grow. But returning back there, it gave me a familiarity about this entrapment. I found really deep interest that kind of could take my mind away from where I was at the time, but still it could be a safe place for me, but where I can also find sanctuary inside this entrapment.
So you were born in Jamaica, you were in the States. What was that experience like for you?
It was a bit shocking, I think, now that I went back and I looked through yearbooks and things like this, just to be a bit nostalgic about things. But new experiences are something that I hold on to really, really dearly, and most of us, I think, do. But the entrapment there felt like a cultural entrapment for me, because of trying to adapt and trying to become something based off of other people's impressions of themselves or their peers, and without them knowing what they need and me following what they need. It's like I'm in like a double trap. And I think that kind of really made me lose my identity, or even if I was looking for it, I don't think there was a chance for me to find it, really, because of the fact that the environment that I was in enclosed most of us, and then I was trying to find my place it felt like an organized trap where everyone is buying in, you're not buying in, but you have to, and you're just there waiting for it to end, maybe. And that's what it felt like now that I look back. It's just I was waiting for something to happen most of the time, but it wouldn't until I had a little bit more freedom in my own spirit. Yeah.
So what does adapting in that sense, in that time and place, what did that mean for you?
It was probably the most important thing for me, because I think now, where I have a chance to expand however I choose, I have a lot of my destiny in my hands. At that time, I didn't have much control, but I really do feel like I found a security inside of myself, although I didn't feel it on the outside. I had so many interests that I couldn't really share with many people, but they were valuable to me enough that I couldn't really let go of them just because of social context. It helped me build a firm inner security with my interests and my loves and things. It was just more about me believing in that I love them so much, and it's okay too. So it wouldn't be as much of a secret, and you can relate to other people's in different groups. So I was able to find these spaces a bit easier because once I left the double entrapment, it felt like everything was coming to me, even if it was to challenge me or to build on emotions and relationships that I haven't been able to really manifest in my full self. So I do feel like that adapting period for me, or even those moments where I had to find peace inside, it really has helped me in this time now, where even if things aren't great, like I know how to make myself internally confident or happy. So I think it was the most important part of my life, and I dumb it down a lot, but I realized when I went back, it was my foundation.
As in that time period, like in middle school and in the States.
Yeah, it's hectic. I mean, high school in America is tragic. There's a professor that I had in college. His name was James Polk, one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And he probably was the first person that gave me the ability to question certain cultural norms in my own household, whether it's religion and things like this, because he was a religious studies teacher and also taught Greek mythology. And he described high school as purgatory. And
wow.
Ever since he said that, I was like, wow, yeah.
This makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, especially when you think about how children are supposed to develop. It is a form of purgatory.
And children are closely aligned with their animalistic tensions.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but I still look back and realize that really was a challenging period for most of us, because we are spending 8 hours of the day together. Our homes might not be great. Our emotions are fluctuating because of all of the things that go on in this adolescence period. So it's like really a whole of everyone just trying to hash it out, to figure it out. And then you have people that are set in their own paradigms. Their parents maybe went to school and they know what they want to do and they have some idea, even if they go to college.
They had a framework,
right? So there are groups like this as well too, but you could tell that they sometimes wish that they could dive into this purgatory a bit deeper, but that separation probably helped them move past certain things where they would deal with them later on in their lives, if it's emotional dynamics and things like this.
You talk about this sense of inner life. You were, because of that, the conflict of that you experienced, you were able to develop a sense of interiority through your passions, through your interests, and that kind of feeds that sense of home and belonging just in the self. And yeah, it's a very interesting way of approaching it at that age. What were some of the things that you were really drawn to that have stayed with you? Definitely
music was probably the most important, just based off of how culture in Jamaica goes. Like there's sound everywhere. It's just loud and extremely stimulating, but in one of the most magical ways, because everybody's weirdly in rhythm. So I felt that was something that I always held on to, because when I came to the States for the first time, my mom really wanted me to be in extracurricular activities all the time. Just you gotta make friends and normalize, or naturalize, I guess you can also say. But I think for me, doing these early activities were also important because I was able to weed out certain things. But the first things that I did was dance. I did tap dancing. And then from tap dancing, I started to do some hip hop stuff every now and then. Then I learned a bit of ballroom for a bit and some like salsa and bachata. And this was going into middle school and the early stages of high school. And then all that, is in a cosm of music in terms of how everything kind of works in my life. I relate it to rhythm. So then what came after that was probably, honestly, animation, because, in these spaces, the worlds are a bit distorted, but a lot of it is based off of rhythm and cadence in terms of how the people are interacting with each other in the, let's say, not only the script, but also the representation of each character. They have dynamics, they have character developments, and then they also theme everything with music as well too. So it really was like a world for me where I could step away, and if it was okay dance, if it was okay music for me, singing and things like this, which I also did, I always found that anything with rhythm could keep me, safe, keep me in tune with things around me. And I think that's how also I gained my affinity for language as well too. So anything that works sonically, it was nice to be internally graced by these things. But if I had to put it in just sequence, it would be first me expressing myself through music and dance, and then finding internal peace mentally through different worlds, through animation and other kind of artistic related things in this field, and they all related to sound in some way. Yeah.
Well, it's like the sounds of life grounding you, and that kind of natural rhythm.
Yeah.
One thing I've been thinking about a lot is like, how do we find a sense of home and safety in the body itself? And our bodies make music. Our bodies, simply by the heartbeat and the movement of blood, and your actual body has a sound to it.
If you have everything in this synchronous moment, then everything is also in like a present state of awareness. And I think, like you said, your heart, your breathing, even if it's your eyes, all these micro movements and things, reveries, everything has some kind of rhythm that you can follow. And, I think that's probably why I also probably like dance so much, because it also reflects people's inner rhythm, no matter if it's something that's offbeat or on. I think it's beautiful all the same. Yeah. It is you.
Yeah, like that, the offbeat inspiration in Jamaica is just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Groove is a big thing, and finding like everything that's not right on is exactly how they live. If you can get around the point, you will. And sometimes it's not the most efficient for maybe structure and capitalism and everything, at least there, because if you want functionality, you need everyone to buy into a certain ideology.
It's funny that you bring up that like sense of the offbeat being an unwillingness to fall into line, because that reminds me of the Windrush coming to England and people being so inspired by the music that led to a huge revolution in London and the UK generally around music, because it was so different. And these people arrived from Jamaica and they were beautifully dressed. They were so just cool. Everybody was just amazingly cool. And it's interesting how much of an impact diaspora communities have had on British culture and identity. And it is this sense of we can be offbeat and pushing against the hegemony of being in line and being on time to a certain beat. How do you reflect on that as someone who has, I know you've got family in the UK as well, and this sense of movement, how do you reflect on that?
I actually think about this all the time. What would it be like if I happened to migrate there? Because my aunt's there and so is my uncle. And when I try to make sense of it from where I am now, it feels like I definitely missed some gap in culture for my own culture in a way, where people in Jamaica, they might feel like that's some place that they can migrate to because of the density of the culture that exists there. But when you look at how much it's impacted everything there, it is an accurate representation of how much of our culture lives elsewhere besides where we are, and how much we don't appreciate what our culture can do for any space in any community. In New York, you have many different kind of Latin communities, and you can tell that influence should somehow return. And I think that's probably what I'm focusing on right now. When I see our culture thriving elsewhere, it makes me wonder about how it's supposed to come back to us. And I've had some conversations about how colonialism has developed over time. People are talking about topics of reverse colonialism, and I think it's an interesting concept. For me, knowing that something exists like that in London or in England, and understanding what it could do for the culture in Jamaica, to understand how powerful it is. So it inspires me a lot to bring back our, let's say, migrated culture back to the roots, like an echo. If it's in a place where you can hear the reflection back, then it can be understood clearly about its power. So I'm pretty inspired by how inspiring our culture is to the world. It's crazy.
I love that point that you made earlier, that dance is a manifestation of people's different rhythms that live inherently in the culture. I had the pleasure of living in Argentina for a year, and tango emanates from there, and that is so inspired by Italian immigration, European immigration into Argentina, and they created their own style of dance influenced by the Latin American energy. And I found it so inspiring, that sense of the sublime through dance. And for me, that was something that I really connected with because it's so non-existent in British culture. If you go to so many countries in Latin America or like any of these places, people dance in the street. Like, it's a human right, and it's just something so unbelievably liberating in that. And I think for me, that's one aspect of why I feel a strong sense of unbelonging in British culture, because I'm so much more connected to that kind of sublime, romanticized appreciation of life, which I feel is so entrapped in the UK. So I think when you had the diaspora communities coming, it almost like shakes the UK out of that like very myopic, constrained, claustrophobic view of life.
So when you're describing this, I think on the UK, there's tons of different kinds of food. When you ask about the culture of food in the UK, a lot of the people that are my age, they're eating food that isn't generally originating from the UK. It's just the same as in America, where you have someone from a Caucasian background that happens to be a part of the hood. And then he goes to his black friend's house, and the family that he's going to, they're cooking different kinds of food, and they're giving him an introduction into the culture. And he's never had pimento spice. He's never had an allspice, or he's never had Scotch bonnet. And that flavor alone then like sets off so many things, or these seasonings sets off so many things that you imagine when people were trying them and discovering them, they're doing the same thing. And that sets a certain precedent for their culture. Whereas imagine someone that's never experienced it but has culture. It's like definitely a mix that they are going through in that moment, but you know, their personality, their experience there becomes a memory that they want to live on. And maybe then it becomes the language, then it becomes the dance, and then it becomes actually the full culture. It puts you in a place where you start to wonder. For me, as soon as I discover something new, my first thought is to deconstruct. Like, okay, culturally, how did they even, like, when did they, how, what was the purpose?
Where did you get this? And movement as well.
Yeah.
People bring their cuisine with them through diaspora.
Yeah. And this is something I was having a fun conversation with someone about. Maybe they'll hear this, but we're talking about noodles migrating. I believe it's like, this is probably one of the most significant things. And then the joke that we made was that maybe for a culture like Jamaica, maybe bringing noodles there will help change everything, because we have tons of different kinds of foods, but I'm pretty sure we only eat, if we have any kind of noodle dish, it's pasta based or Italian based. So we haven't gone so far to Asia. And
they've not seen udon yet.
No, they haven't seen udon. No. And
they haven't seen rice vermicelli yet.
No. And I think this migration is an example in my head of how to help a culture expand, because they have all the tools, they have all the resources, but the cultivation techniques didn't reach that far yet.
You want to see the first person in Jamaica eat vermicelli.
Yeah. Or an oxtail ramen.
Oh,
this was a joke, and I think we're gonna make it. Me and Sandra will try it for sure. Yeah, no doubt.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So, as perfect segue, what does home taste, sound, smell, and feel like for you?
I think it has to do with these first experiences when I enter a culture. Of course, Jamaican food has a very significant place in my heart. If as soon as I smell it, and I get all these images, it's flood. And I think that's something that I will always hold dear to me. But I do find it fascinating to go to a new place and find my favorite dish. It will smell and taste like something that will remind me of this feeling that I've had in Jamaica. Because it's not so much about the taste, because I love all flavors really, and I don't mind trying anything. I think texture is more I'm like, ooh, it's a bit squishy. But when it comes to flavors, I really think almost like sound and music. It's something relative that I can find to compare and seek inspiration through. So I think Jamaican food is probably my root, but wherever the flavors that kind of inspired Jamaica from, if it's curry, some Latin American dishes I feel are existing in our development of certain foods and things like this. And then also Asian food is very prominent in our actual spice dynamic as well too. It's Szechuan province. I think the Scotch bonnet is from the Szechuan province as well too, and this is literally the main thing that we use in almost every dish. It definitely tastes and reminds me of Jamaica, but maybe what Jamaica could be thing. It sounds like something that is familiar to me, but I can always question. And I believe where I've come from, it happens to have a lot of stimulation. So immediately wherever I am, I check the amplitude of the sound around me. And I feel like home sounds like me interacting with the sound. And if I can engage myself in it, then it's something that I can say is home. And the places especially that I've been where I begin to speak the languages, it starts to sound like home, not only just through understanding, but being able to really act out and show my colors in a way where I haven't been able to see before. So I think it sounds like maybe loud expression of my own heart, if I can exist in it in a way, not feeling so disconnected from the space in terms of audio. As long as I can input, I feel like it's something that I can also feel is home. Because I don't need to understand everyone. It's from Italy or even if it's from China, how they move these things. It's as long as I can... Communication, right? These things are for me the most important thing. Okay, this is home. As soon as I go back to Asia, or let's say specifically when I hit China, and being able to say gai jiao fan, this is a dish that I had often where it's like things stacked on top of each other and things like this. And the moment I say it, someone's reaction to this, and then that breeds something else. So I think it's a place of understanding in terms of sound for me. As long as I can input myself into it in an auditory experience, I think it could feel like home for sure. Because once you're in the room, people probably will welcome you. I've always found that there's certain cultural layers you must break past. And the moment you get to that point where they're also excited about the representation of their cultures.
And you say a dish that people love there, and they're like, "What, you know about this?" Like,
it's certainly one of those moments where you feel welcome, and they are also excited about your interaction and your willingness to communicate in this safe space for them. This is their culture. They're happy to have you, of course, but for you to resonate with their heart in a way that they're exploding about their own life, it's beautiful because you live it normally and it's just you're happy with it. I have life, so it's good. But when someone represents it for you, it's like you're looking at a mirror, but you don't even know who you're looking at. But it's just it's really special.
You're seeing them and they're also seeing you in that way.
Absolutely. Breaking down walls.
A lot of walls need to be broken down these days. Now you're in Berlin and you're going to be in Taiwan in a matter of a month or two. What does that movement mean to you at this time?
So when I think about it from how you've been asking it and presenting it, it really makes me feel like this idea that I mentioned about expanding, it's difficult to do. Even if you find a place to be right now, to really immerse yourself, which I think is unfair. It takes a lot more than it should. And when it goes back to these walls that we're talking about, it creates a sense of fear to introduce new concepts or to welcome different dynamics that can help us all live together in a more organic way, but just really maybe as humans probably are intended to. And I think for me, going backwards is very important. And even if it's physically to be able to then understand how people would live and what thoughts came to mind, I do imagine that if I traced the vestiges of my life, I think at some point I might have been there. It might not be me, but maybe a part of me and my culture. I feel like backtracking this path of maybe where all of my potential soul existences were, I feel like I can discover how I really came to be. And at some point that can help me expand a bit more. And I do feel like I have this connection with China. And it was one of the best years of my life because of the psychological freedom that I experienced. Because I told many people this, and sometimes they question it because of the regime and things. But when I say it, I often mean about this acceptance of the animalistic side of us, and not just in one...
The survival.
Yeah, not in one linear way, where I think when you look at Berlin and you compare it to the rest of Germany, it ends up being quite linear in terms of how you think about the psychology of freedom and things like this. And it's not on purpose, it's just because of where it is. When I was in Asia, there are things instinctively that helped my senses heighten. Like I felt like I could be in the wild, but there's no trees and there's no like real animals, but everyone, if you don't want to equate the human to it, but for me, I felt like having this power to call on my instincts naturally, not trying to be, let's say,
it's not demonized. Instincts aren't demonized.
I like to ride my bike everywhere. And for instance, something that I find very pleasurable is riding without hands sometimes, just for the fun of it. I like to, whatever, if I'm going to raise my hands and things. And in Asia, specifically, let's say China, because that's where I was. And also, I guess you can count Malaysia as well, too, where you're riding and you see just almost chaos, but it's like everyone understands it. So everyone is in harmony. It makes complete sense. Whereas like here in Berlin, if I do this, it's against the law completely to ride without my hands, or if I do something on the opposite side of the road, and you of course you want this direction to do the right thing, but then if it's gonna lower your awareness, how do you say being human and having the human experience is being fulfilled to its maximum potential? So I think this is where I sit emotionally with this transition. Like I'm ready to live as I know I'm intended to, where my instincts can stay sharp and I can be explorative about my abilities. So that's, I think, the motivation behind the move. And also it's difficult to be somewhere in New York, a room that literally, I don't even know how to describe it, could be 1,200, and that 1,200 can be so much more valuable elsewhere, whether it is to put in the work for the 1,200 or you're making a little less than that, but then you still have the means to do some important things for your lifestyle and just a balance of health. So yeah, I think I know that exists there. And I think this is what I'm hoping to expand within as well too, to see how I change.
I like that metaphor that you used around traffic as symptom of manifestation of culture. And I guess that also taps into like Eastern philosophies, because it's the idea of it's not about the self, it's about the mass. And collectively, you touch on a really fundamental thing that I think our generation in particular is grappling with. Do we make home when so much in the world geopolitically, environmentally is becoming inhospitable? I think one of the challenges and the heightened competition that comes out of late stage capitalism. So we're already at the moment, we've already experienced the very crippling, marginalizing effects of late capitalism, in that inflation's on the rise, wages are stagnating, people can't afford to live decent lives, quality of life across the States and in the UK and in Europe is decreasing. People are slowly realizing that they won't accept life like this. Like you're seeing so many riots in France, and I think that will happen definitely in the UK. It's almost like you're turning to an Eastern approach with it, because people acknowledge that we all need each other and there's more of an ecosystem around the sense of survival in life.
Listening to the land that you're living on, instead of trying to suffocate or take from the land. For me, understanding these spaces and then saying to yourself, okay, when I go to any place else in the world, how does this image of myself become in another place where it doesn't exist? And it takes another form of cultivation. You have to start to carve out space where people feel like they can also fit. And I think this is the primary mistake that maybe a lot of us will tend to make, is that when we go to someplace new, we feel like they need us. The most important thing is to understand the land that they had to express themselves through. And you should also give to that land so that you can equally get something back from it, rather than thinking you need to give them something. And then, okay, you'll think to yourself, all right, well, because we've given you something, you don't need to give us anything back. But ironically, what you've given them is probably something that has taken themselves away from their own culture, or has had to sell, or let's say manage themselves on an idea that is built off of another culture's concepts, placed value on it. So now we've rushed, or they have rushed to build their society around it instead of keeping it for themselves. For me, we studied Spanish, quite early in school in Jamaica. And then I think about it, I'm like, but why? And I look back and I understand that a lot of places in Europe have been more than I thought, than just, if it's, for instance, the British, the Germans were there, the Spanish were there. There's tons of people that were there, more than I can imagine. And a lot of the things that we've held on to, especially through religion, there are things that clearly aren't ours, but we have no choice because divinity is important to us, just like celebration. If you couple two things that relate, it's like trying to turn spiritual essence into matter and then not respecting that matter in a way. And this is what comes to mind when you say that.
And what languages would you say you found home in?
Well, patois, of course. I love speaking of my patois. I feel like German has helped me really build an understanding of my verbal psychology. So that was the essence of myself, understanding how we think a bit. Action's a bit reversed. Action is prioritized in German, and also thinking about how and where the verbs go and things like this. And then I think just through melodic harmony, probably Japanese, because they have it's not so wavy. It doesn't go everywhere. It's flat in the way their expression goes. But if you have any representation of a Western song like that's covered by someone Japanese, you can tell that it can still harmonically and phonetically work really well. So I think these 3, 4, one is a dialect, but these are the ones that I've found solace in for myself to really represent as home, for sure.
That's beautiful. I love it. And I love when languages they have a specific word that conveys a complex feeling or experience. So like for Japanese, like I love the word komorebi. It's like the light, like the way the light dapples through the leaves and the sunlight dapples through the trees. And is there a concept that makes you feel very cozy or at home?
Maybe zimi. You could also represent it as "do you see me" kind of thing. It's like a representation of not only my words but myself, and I think that's a good one, because we say all the time "you see me" after we say, or we say "you understand" after we finish our sentences sometimes. But "you see me" is a big one. You see me, like, you know, I mean, I go out the street, I mean, I do my thing. You see me? Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. It's being seen.
Yeah. Seen and understood, for sure. So it looks like learning to adapt to nature in a way that I'm also happy to create in it. So for instance, I really want to go to rice fields and learn to bake rice.
Cultivate rice, yeah.
I think this journey for me looks like my final expansion of home, because I hope really to represent my culture in that space, but I hope to adopt the culture in a way that I can bring the culture back to where I'm from. And I think this journey is a linking of hemispheres to me, and I find that to be the most important part about this next phase of my life, because I think it's going to really define a lot of what I become, or what I am becoming, for sure, and maybe also my culture as a whole, you know. So I think Jamaica needs to have noodles. Yeah, we need to have a lot more noodles. Yeah, this is where we're at.
So explain to me, so what's your vision then for the future? You would say you want to bring some of that culture back, or a kind of being a bridge between those two places. What does that look like?
It looks like a form of modular cultivation where technique isn't limited to space. It's understood and applied in space to see how it changes and how it develops. And I think this is where my heart is, because for me, technique lies in a place like this. Asia technique is like everything.
Yeah.
And in Jamaica, expression is everything, not so much technique. So the balancing of these things for me seem to be understanding where what applies. And I think about it often with friends, where we're from so many different places and we can exist in so many different places. So it makes sense for us to really commit to our own images that are being projected to almost fulfill this space and be the bridges that we're supposed to be. And I do think a lot of us are starting to understand this, even if it's to migrate from just density, because we want to appreciate what mass exists, not what is being reshaped and transmuted into whatever we feel has this representation of memory and importance. And I'm reading a book, this philosopher, his name's Henry Bergman, and it's called Matter and Memory. And the book often talks about how our representation or understanding and extension of matter is a representation of ourselves, for sure.
Wow.
Like how we think about how shapes exist and what they have the potential to be is our potential to make that exist.
Wow.
Yeah. But the moment we start to reduce things to just matter itself, we're going to change everything for people like me and you there, where culture doesn't exist on a linear plane. It's like a paradigm, and it rotates and it changes like a Rubik's Cube. So this is my dream, for us to be able to understand this paradigm and be able to link the rest of everything together, however it needs to be, each person in a quadrant doing what they need to do, or groups, if anything. So this is my contribution, I think, going to Taiwan.
I guess when you're in Taiwan, that gives you a new canvas, right?
Yes.
To explore on.
Yeah, this is probably what I'm most excited about, because right now I'm in a phase of wanting to allow myself to express. I think we will always innately have an opportunity to, but to allow yourself is to really give yourself to the space and not force yourself to exist in the space. It's like you are there with it. And for me,
in kinship.
Yeah. And, you know, being there, I can already imagine things that I don't believe are possible now. And this is what I'm like, yeah, okay, what is this?
That gets you excited.
Yeah. So this new canvas is very special to me, I think, because I do feel like it's something that in a secular relation, I've been there already. And I feel like I've not to say Taiwan, but just in terms of cultural experience, I've wanted to be there, and I've existed there before. And I do think that this is I returned to finish for sure. Same like Berlin. I left, I came and then I left, and then I came back, and then it was the part that developed me fully. And then this is the same thing when I went to China. I learned discipline and technique, and then I came back to Berlin, and I manifested most things that I hoped to in terms of my inclusion and also contribution to certain things. And now I feel like my contribution, especially now in this period, is going to be one directly from me. And if people are willing to, let's say, collaborate as well too, I feel like it could have the same effect as well, for sure.
What advice would you give to someone who finds themselves unsure of where they belong?
I would say that there is a purpose in it. There's a purpose in the discomfort that we feel, and it's not meant to be eluded in any way. It's supposed to be welcomed, and this is something that I've struggled with for a long time, but I think it's now in these phases of my life in the past 5 years, and especially with all of what we all just went through, that circumstances show us what things we need to change. And if you don't feel like you belong someplace, the idea is that for you have a sanctuary as well too. And if you're not feeling the external, the internal is a place for you. And to find that is always going to magnetize everything around you. Regardless if you're in some complicated situation, you will see signs from the rest of the universe the moment that you feel in tune with yourself. So if you believe in what you're going through and don't fight it, I feel like you are on your path. But if you try to run from it, you will forever stay in this cycle of trying to play out characters that you should understand and play out scenes that you should understand or innately know, because you're the one that's creating them and manifesting them. So I would say internal peace and allowing yourself to feel this discourse and this dismemberment. Like you feel it's like you have no head sometimes, or your head is someplace else most of the time.
I love that.
Yeah,
it's the importance of developing your inner life, exploring your sense of interiority, and welcoming that discomfort and seeing it as the sense of discomfort that you feel in your unbelonging, wherever you might be. It's part of the journey to coming back to yourself.
Yeah, purpose and process. These are the two things that I feel like is a miss. And there's one album that I must recommend to anyone who feels this way, and it's Sampha, Process. And this album, I think, was it 2017, right? 16, 17 is this album helped me understand a process of understanding your internal and representing it in a way that can manifest where other people can relate to. And that's basically what you end up getting to when you build your community. We all ended up in the same space because we had relative experiences that have led us here. So allowing yourself to continue to experience those things and the direction that it points you in because of it will lead you to the people that, you know, are genuinely feeling the same way as you. And that's your community for sure.
Yeah, I love that image that you use of like, by developing your inner life and using that process to explore that, you then magnetize other people to you who have had shared experience or resonate with what you're exploring yourself.
Yeah. Your pool is like welcoming. It vibrates like we are full of water. And this, in my head, is a representation of allowing your waves to flow within your body, allowing air to come in and for you to continue to breathe into the soul. And really, all of what's going on in there will start to just emanate beauty. And really, people see it. And I've even realized that the more I feel comfortable with myself, the more others feel comfortable with themselves, and they feel open to their vulnerabilities and start to trust. And again, these are the things that are building proper relationships to also change things as well. So yeah, I think these are the key concepts for me, at least, and I would hope that they can be helpful to anyone else, of course, because it is not an easy journey, but the challenge is worth it for sure. Because if you end up manifesting yourself, it feels like a certain level of tense, I think, where it's like anything is possible. It's like things feel...
Oh, it's human flourishing.
Yeah, everything feels innately just beautiful, regardless if it's a struggle. You're like, what's the challenge here? Got it. All right, let's go. It's nice. It is really, really nice.
That's beautiful. And if people want to follow your sonic explorations and the work that you're putting out there, how can they find you?
So I am basically starting a small project inspired by my grandmother, actually, because she's the most amazing. You know what? Grandma also reminds me of home always, because literally I feel like she is the representation of what I intend to be in a parallel world, where if she had the opportunities that I did, I think she would be a version of me in a way, just spiritually. So this project I'm developing, it's called Lost Slang, which ironically is about finding purpose in matter that we don't feel is important. Like everything has a sonic relation to what's going on. How we express and what we let out is being consumed by the things around us, and they must also do something, although we can't see, but we know they are if you're in tune with it. So the project is called Lost Slang, and I'm developing a whole concept behind it where places where I go and people that I meet, we sonically dive in no matter what it is. It doesn't have to be just music, but anything that can enrich your soul in a space where you maybe feel like you can belong. Nothing is really ever lost. Yeah.
So where can they perhaps hear some of these sonic explorations?
So the website is lostlang.xyz, and then I'm basically running a bit of a endless stream at some point where it's like many things are going to be going from there from different projects of people, and that's going to be on a broadcaster app with some friends who are building a decentralized network for people like me, so where I don't really feel like my content belongs in a full-on algorithm, but where people are looking for a space to exist and they want to be there as well too, not where we're all congregating because it is a social norm, which I'm part of the congregation too, but there's different circumstances and situations that will call for a bit more elegance in how we relate to things, for sure. And I feel like this is my approach now, where it's like I would like to give people the opportunity in a space where we all are familiar with to just be someplace else for a bit, even if it's for 20 minutes out of the day. So yeah, lostlang.xyz, and I guess the Instagram is the same as well too. But yeah, these two things I think are the next flood of content that will be coming from me, where they will be.
The place where they'll find it. Yeah. Well, thank you, Alix. I'm so unbelievably happy to finally have this conversation with you.
I get it.
I got this time. You've been listening to Zeno. To stay up to date with our monthly episodes, you can sign up to our newsletter at zenocast.org or follow us on Instagram at @Zeno_pod. Our theme music is composed by Alix Julian Edwards.